All right, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. We switch gears and we go to one of the great Bronxites. One of the people we don't have a Bronx if we don't have Edwin Pagan. Nice to see you, Eddie.
Thanks for inviting me, Gary. Always love to be part of your program.
It's listen, I was looking, so I got my list of all the things like Eddie's credits. Let's see, he's technically the director of communications and media for Nos Quedamos.
That's right.
He's the I guess formerly or still current member of Seis del Sur,
Yeah,
six of the
yeah.
greatest photographers
Seis
of our
del Sur.
lifetimes. And what we're going to start with is you're the founder in chief of Latin Horror, a writer, filmmaker, and a lifelong horror fan. Um, Tell me how such a nice guy got involved with loving horror films, and then, of course, then making them, which is what we're going to show.
Yeah, I got involved in it by accident. My sister was dating the gentleman who at that time was her boyfriend, who would ultimately be the father of her children, and my mother would have them take me to the movies.
And about how old were you?
I was about
5, 10, 20?
no, I was about 7.
7 years old.
7, and the first film that they took me to was not The Exorcist, Tales from the Crypt, the original version, which was the British version. It had Joan Collins in it. It was an anthology. And we went to see it at the Star, which was at that time on Hunts Point and Southern Boulevard.
When we had movie theaters.
Right.
We could do a whole show on where are the movie theaters. That's another
just
story.
That. And so I saw the movie and something about it attracted me. And probably a little less or a little about 2 years later, they went to the movies again and dragged me along. And the next movie that I got to see in the theaters in person was The Exorcist. And by then I was hooked. So it started with really good golden age horror movies.
And so now let's move into the notion of obviously everything you do is Latin based, is Latin culture. That's who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a dearth of Latin creators of horror movies, or is that like there is an issue in there?
There is. And when I first started Latin horror, there wasn't a lot of them corralled around the idiosyncrasy of the Latin culture being part of it. So if they were doing horror, they were just trying to emulate sort of the American aesthetic and the tropes. But little by little over the years, probably the last like 10 to 15, there's been a really critical mass of filmmakers from South and Central America, Brazil, and Spain.
So,
doing the work and calling.
Let me ask you: is there a difference in let's say the Latin horror films versus Anglican or other horror films?
Yeah, I think
Wow.
Guillermo del Toro summed it up. Was one of the he's the Latin horror meister, we call him. He summed it up as this: American horror, at least how it stands now. It wasn't that way in the 50s. Destroys the physical, the body, right? Bodies hitting the floor. And Latin horror, much like Japanese horror and Korean horror, they have similarities, destroys the mind and the psyche. It's about like the suspense. So horror films, American horror films, are more about plot. This happens, that happens. And, people run into the building even though they could be in danger.
Wow.
In Latin horror, which is like in our tradition, we believe that it exists. We just want to know why it's after us, whatever it is.
Wow. And I've already seen the trailer for Scream 6, right? That's what it is?
Yes.
Roman numeral 6. I've seen the trailer for it, and now that puts it in perspective. Thank you so much. That was very helpful.
Yeah.
So you want to get to it? So then you have made films, and you've been one of the great photographers of our borough, but you've turned that into filmmaking and horror films. You want to tell us about Scream or
yeah, I'll tell you first. I'll lead you into that. I got started in photography when I was 10 at the Hoe Avenue Boys Club, part of the Madison Square Boys Club. And a few years when I was about 16, they gave me some vouchers for some courses at the School of Visual Arts, production and cinematography. So I got into filmmaking proper, which for me was easy because I already knew about dealing with film. So I started,
and visuals. You have an eye for visuals,
and then,
right? And lighting, of course,
and lighting as a cinematographer. And I started, I just started working on the things that attracted me the most, which is horror films. And that was even before I started coming up with the Latin horror aspect of it. and working on a lot of other people's projects as a cinematographer. But I
But
always took the jobs that were more like horror, suspense, or thrillers.
and listen, this is a beautiful thing. You can't help but put your culture into your artwork. And
That's
if you
right.
have the opportunity to do it, so you have this idiom that you want to work with,
Mhm.
but you say, okay, now let's move it to the next level. And all right, we could talk forever about this. I want to show people Scream 6. This is coming out when, in March? So we're getting
It's
the sneak
March
preview here.
10th. It hits theaters, in wide distribution. It's the sixth in a series,
Hmm.
and it brings back one or two members from the original cast. Nev Campbell, to a lot of people's amazement, decided not to come back. And People magazine revealed later on in June of last year that the reason she wasn't coming back was because they weren't meeting the salary requirement that she wanted.
Right.
But we do have some other people in it that are dynamic. Jenna Ortega, who we know, who's sort of gotten into the zeitgeist of late by playing Wednesday on the Netflix series of the same name, was in the one previous to this. She was in 5, and she actually starts that particular film more or less how the original started, by getting a call, and she's going to
Mhm.
be back in this one. And Melissa
Right.
Barbara Martinez, who's Mexican, who also had a role in the last one, is in the next one coming up too. The interesting thing is that the next one is set in New York City.
Well, there is a lot here that our Bronx people are going to relate to.
That's right.
Hopefully, not the horror aspect of it, but so grab your loved one, hold on to your chair. This is going to be a bumpy ride. Scream 6 from Eddie Pagan and company. Let's take a look.
Guys?
Damn you. It's so well done, Eddie. I have to tell you, it is. I'm a weenie. I don't generally go to horror films. I'll probably go to this one.
Yeah, there
I,
are. It's a good bunch of people working in the film, so it's going to be really amazing to see it come out and see it set in New York City.
overhead shot. How'd you do that? You
Oh,
got-
well, the film, we're promoting the film. I wasn't the director of the
Okay,
film,
good.
but we've partnered with Paramount to do all the local publicity. But the as a cinematographer, those overhead shots these days are easier to do because they just do industrial capacity drone.
Right. I was gonna say a drone.
They
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
need the helicopters
Anyway,
anymore.
I don't know. I'm just. It's so well done. Even the
Yep.
trailer is so well done. It's just incredible. So it'll be general. People will be able to see it.
Yeah. Starting March 10th is when it kicks into theaters, and it's gonna be interesting to see how it does, particularly now that Jenna Ortega having sort of really blown up with this Wednesday on Netflix. How sort of that younger demographic is going to go
Uh,
and watch the
getting
film,
people in.
which
Listen,
normally
it's
is not always
thrilling.
necessary.
I
Though.
want to move on because
Mhm.
Eddie has been taking pictures for how many years? When did you first pick up a camera?
When I was 10 years old, so
Mhm.
I'm 59 now, so like 41 years. It's been quite a while.
Been
Yeah.
quite a while. How has your picture taking? Throw up the first picture if you would, Anderson. How has your picture taking changed? Oh, here we go.
Well, I still am very much interested in a lot of the same things. Young people, street photography. I've done a lot of portrait work and sort of stuff for magazines, but I always go back innately back to the streets. just capturing everyday life, everyday people doing things that we normally don't take a second gander at, but which is part of the fabric of what it makes us, right? Like protests like you see there with that was a protest against Bronx, Lebanon's incinerator, which was polluting the neighborhood.
Mm.
This is about police brutality. The one on top was taken in the early 90s, and the one that you see at the bottom was in the midst of COVID, at the beginning of COVID in Times Square. And that was the Con Edison blast in 89, and then the big explosion that knocked down 2 buildings in 2014 in Spanish Harlem. So I always try to group things together based on how life comes full circle time and again, and we take for granted that it's happening, or we got caught off guard for the first time, but we don't learn our lessons.
You know, in my own media, one of the things that I have told many people about trying to cover the Bronx in the
Mhm,
work that I do, um, it's like undiscovered territory.
mhm,
And when I see photos like the ones you just saw, it's finally letting people see who we really are.
right.
And I think that is it's so it's what one of the things that I loved about Seis del Sur. For people don't know, it's Six of the South,
Mhm.
who were six photographers who grew up essentially in the same era, et cetera, et cetera. Um, do you struggle when you go out to take pictures, or are, like I said, it's undiscovered territory, but it's all around us, or it's very easy to find subjects because everywhere you look is, if you see it right, it's an iconic photo.
Right. I mean, there are times that I specifically go out with the purpose of doing photography and taking pictures, but a lot of the time the camera is almost always around my neck.
Mm.
And as I'm looking and walking, I'm always looking at things visually, both as a photographer and cinematographer and designer. So I'm always looking at how things fall together. And I think part of the thing that I think is my superpower that I've come to terms with, that I pay attention to, is seeing things come together. So if people are walking and there's a car crossing, I can almost instantly say where they're going to merge, and based on what's in the background, see sort of this puzzle come together.
Timing, of course,
Right.
is everything. About for you as a person, what has photography done, and the fact that you have this skill and you're able to visualize like a scene you just saw, which of
Mhm.
course is so common, and then capture it and show it for you and your growth as a person? Has it? What's been the impact?
Yeah, as an artist, I mean, I think when I first was discovering photography, and the Boys Club was the one that introduced me to it, I was looking, and I think we all look as a way to navigate life. But I think as you start looking at things in a more profound way, and you start connecting the dots, and you start paying attention, you learn to see, and there's a profound difference in that. And so I walk through life not just looking to get around, I'm always seeing, so I'm observing, I'm taking in. There are times I look at things as I'm walking around, and to me, they almost seem like they go in slow motion because I'm paying so much attention to something that it seems to stop for me. And it sounds kind of like a crazy artistic thing to say, a trope, but it does feel that way for me, where I do kind of challenge time, and am able to capture it sometimes the way that I want to.
You know, we talk about what our young people need, and I think about the Bronx Documentary Center and the
Amazing
Bronx
center.
Art Center,
Mhm,
that they put cameras in kids' hands and tell them to go out. If you think about what Eddie just told us about what
mhm.
influence it's had on him, what we really might want for our kids to do. Listen, this is the dialogue you and I. Anytime we have 5 minutes, this is the story we're going to tell. But thank you
Yep.
so much for joining us, sharing some of your work. Let's remember March 10th. Let's look for Scream 6.
Sick.
And anytime you have something, let us know because we want you here. And
Absolutely. And thank you, Gary, and your team for always putting the spotlight on people from the community and doing it with dignity, which is a big difference than
well,
just
that's right.
doing a fluff piece. So
Yes.
thank you.
Believe me, you see me on the street, it's not always so dignified. No, I'm joking. Be well, Eddie. Take care,
Thank
my
you.
friend. And folks, that will do it for the Bronx Buzz. And you know what's going to happen? Yeah, we'll be back next week. That's why we're here. So be well. Happy New Year, everybody.